Welcome everybody to our second webinar in this series that the Children's Equity Project and the Century Foundation are hosting on dual language education. And in particular, this series is really covering quality in dual language education and what that looks like. Last month, we had our first webinar to introduce the series. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the programmatic structures of dual language education and what are the core dimensions that we need as we start to think about expansion and new dual language education opportunities for kids, because we know that access is way too low. So let's jump to the next slide, please. Before we start, just, a huge thank you to the funders who made this work possible, including the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and the Heisen-Simons Foundation. That's been a long time funder and supporter of the Children's Equity Project. Next slide, please. So this work in partnership with the Century Foundation has resulted in a number of reports where we looked at the question of access to high quality dual language education. And we split it up kind of into two chunks of the project. And the first was the access side of the house. So really trying to understand who has access today, right now, to dual language education. And so our colleagues at the Century Foundation and Dr. Williams in particular and his team really took this piece on, and we published together a number of briefs that really describe this massive data set that they built, really using public information on existing enrollment in dual language programs. On the right side of your screen, these two other briefs were the quality side of the house. And so Dr. Sigrid Soto-Boykin and I and a team of folks really began to dig deep into what is quality in dual language program. How do we do this right? We can't stop at access. We have to attend to quality and ensuring that these dual language opportunities are of the highest quality because that's what our kids deserve. And so we published two briefs. The first one you see there is operationalizing high quality dual language programming, where we provided a new framework that I'll talk a little bit about and then in subsequent slides. And the second one was a number of case studies that looked at programs across the US who are doing a really thoughtful job at dual language education across the infant, toddler through elementary continuum. Next slide, please. So we have an amazing panel today. I just have so much respect for every person on this panel today. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Connor Williams, who I mentioned a bit ago, from the Century Foundation, Gladys Montes from the United Way, formerly from the United Way Center of Excellence in Miami, Dr. Michael Robert, superintendent at the Osborne School District in Arizona, Dr. Catherine Rodriguez from Dreamers Academy in Florida, and Lucy Luceno from Brea Public Charter School in Washington, D.C. Next slide, please. So before we get to our panel, I'm just going to provide a few really brief framing slides, and then we'll spend most of the time hearing from our experts from across the country. This was our framework that we published in that first report on quality across, again, as I mentioned, the age spectrum. And it looked at a number of different areas, right? And we used, I think Sigrid may have read every research article published on each of these different issues. And so we reviewed the research, we reviewed the data, we did interviews with programs who are doing a really thoughtful job of dual language education. And we brought together a convening of experts in Washington, D.C. that included educators, administrators, policymakers, researchers, and other folks to really discuss what the core dimensions are. And then within each of these, right, like what are the big pieces that we need to be highlighting in terms of lessons learned from practice, in terms of lessons learned from research, and so on. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about that lime green one, programmatic structures, as kind of the first and fundamental piece. Like, what do we have to have in place to then, right, build out and figure out the language allocation and the curriculum and the workforce and assessment and everything that goes beyond that. Next slide, please. So just a really brief introduction on this particular dimension. right? For each of the dimensions, we provide a brief overview as to what this is, right? Programmatic structures here are really the infrastructural pieces that we need to have in place as we begin to think about quality in dual language education. For each of the dimensions, we then provide a number of quality indicators, which are supposed to be actionable, observable things that programs can have in place and begin to use to plan for dual language education and high quality dual language education. A few of the examples here, right? Really having a leadership team that represents the community with various defined roles, right? Folks who are making decisions and being really intentional about planning across all of the different pieces that we mentioned in the framework, right? Assessment and workforce and recruitment and retention and curriculum and family engagement and all of those pieces, right? Having a body of folks who are thinking and putting all of these pieces together as you're building a program. Everybody having, on that leadership team and beyond, right? From, every single role in your school, in your program, understanding why, right? Understanding the why behind dual language education, understanding the research, understanding, families' perspectives, and really having a shared understanding, that shared appreciation, that shared awareness of bilingualism and its benefits, particularly for kids who are speaking languages other than English at home. Really setting a vision and a mission aligned with policies. So not just something that appears on a website or on a piece of paper, and that's kind of the end of it, right? But really making sure that we have a vision and a mission that is aligned with policies, that is aligned with practice, that is aligned with programmatic decisions at the level, and that our staff are embodying that, right, through the programming that they're offering to our young kids. Really thinking about our enrollment policies and what that looks like, right? What does our family engagement look like? And then what does our enrollment policies look like? As we talk about extensively in our piece that looks at equitable access to dual language education, right? Without an equitable enrollment policy where we're ensuring that kids who have the most to gain from dual language education get in the door first, right? We risk pushing them out of these slots in these programs. And so this is a pattern that we've seen in some communities across the US. Again, our report on equitable access really gets into that in a lot more detail, but really ensuring that from the get-go, we are devising and developing policies that really prioritize English learners, if you're in the elementary space, right? Kids who are speaking other languages other than or in addition to English at home, kids who have, the partner language as part of their cultural and racialized identity, right? Really thinking about those pieces as we build out more seats and more slots. And then the last piece is really thinking about how we're articulating our policies that address all of the things, right? The rest of that wheel that we showed in the previous slide, right? Do we have a plan for language allocation? What does that look like, right? What do the teachers need to know about that? How do we have to structure our school day around that? What's our family engagement approach, right? Are we ensuring that we're partnering with families on these pieces, that we are reaching out to families in the community, particularly families of English learners and other multilingual students, right, in the community to get access, what that professional development looks like. Who are the staff that we need for these positions to be lead teachers, to be assistant teachers? What is the professional development plan we need? What are those PD pieces that we need to have embedded? What does that coaching look like, right? And so really thinking about how we articulate all of that and have a coordinated, structured plan around implementation, considering all those different pieces, including kids with disabilities, right? And how we integrate and ensure that kids with disabilities have equitable access to these programs. Next slide, please. All right, so I think if our panelists can come off camera, we can stop sharing screen so we can see each other. Welcome, welcome panelists. So I already provided a brief introduction. I'm gonna jump into some questions here. And I'm gonna start with Gladys. You led a high quality dual language immersion program in Miami for many, many years. one of the best ones I've ever seen. I always share that. But talk to us about how you built that program. It didn't happen overnight, and how you really thought about quality intentionally built in at each of those levels.
I think just like you, thank you first for the introduction. And just like you were talking about, it is a long process. There's a process, the pre-implementation that, it's completed by a think tank of people in the community who have an interest in not only quality early childhood education, but has an interest and understanding of what dual language acquisition is. And just like you have in that great, presentation that you had before, looking at all of the areas that are going to be part of the programmatic and implementation of this program. Who's going to be impacted by the services? And, always we have the children at the top of our pyramid, because this is why we're here. And then what are all of the supporting areas around this child, the teacher, the family, the program itself, the budget of the program, and how much money is it going to cost to get this program going. And so putting all of those areas and putting them in writing, I think it's very important, because it gives us the opportunity to go back and rethink and make sure that what we're doing is really moving us forward. So again, I think that a thinking tank before we start, so we can bring to the table the allies, those that are going to help you, because it's going to be hard, and there's going to be a lot of things that you're going to have to deal with. But when you have a group of allies around you that can really, create this program based on the community where you are, this is what is going to, I think, give you the step forward and the step toward success.
Thank you, Gladys. And we didn't go too much into the why of dual language education in this webinar, assuming the folks on the line have that piece already. But I think Sigrid did share in the chat a number of reports that we published that get at the benefits of bilingualism, the benefits of dual language immersion in particular for different groups of kids. So would invite folks to review to really get that why. Lisa, let me go to you next. You play a leadership role at an amazing program in DC. Tell us about that program and tell us what the core structural ingredients are that make it such a rich experience for families.
Yes, thank you for facilitating this important conversation, for bringing us together, and including infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and elementary children in this framework. I really appreciate that. And it's so important some of the programmatic aspects that you just talked about, and I was going to highlight some of those, such as recruitment and enrollment. We want to ensure that when we're building quality programs, we avoid unintended consequences and ensure that access is equitable. And in Washington, D.C., that was a very intentional process for us of ensuring that we were reaching the students that we needed to reach. So I'm going to try to outline some of those structural elements and starting big and then moving inwards towards the more specific programmatic elements. We offer our program across 4 campuses in Washington, D.C., and we have a strategic partnership and a co-location with Mary Center, which is a federally qualified health clinic that enables us to offer education in tandem with healthcare and social services for an even more robust social change model. We serve approximately 1,000 students per year, offering adult education, early childhood education, and workforce credentialing. Within early childhood, we have children 0 to 5, and within adult ed, there are multiple levels of ESL, digital literacy, workforce, and child development classes. So some of those key family integration, I'm going to talk a lot about family engagement, and some of those key pillars that I'm talking about that really work together to provide a structure that leads to impactful learning for children and families. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge that quality is really operationalized in the context of strong relationships that at their best are actively countering traditional hierarchies. And I'm talking about relationships between teachers and children, between teachers and parents, and at BRIA, parents are also students, between parents and children, and between and among educators and the rest of school staff. So a really key belief that undergirds everything we do in this 2-gen program is that parents are their children's first and most important teachers. And from that belief, then we put into place culturally sustaining approaches that leverage families' funds of knowledge. And this extends not only to teaching and learning, but also to how we conduct enrollment and recruitment. In order to provide a place where each child and each parent can reach their full potential, it really has to start with that recognition that each child and each parent is a unique and whole person, and then curiosity to let that relationship unfold in an educational context. So some of the core elements of the model that I mentioned earlier are the bilingual and inclusive early childhood classes, child development sessions for adults, and something we call family time. The early childhood classes, it's an inclusive, bilingual, Reggio-inspired program with a strong connection to nature and the outdoors, even in an urban setting. The child development program for parents provides a lot of content on how children develop and learn many topics such as early brain development, the bilingual brain, sensory learning, learning through play, co-regulation, identity development, knowing your rights, and navigating the U.S. school system are among those core topics. The sessions for parents are primarily workshop style, arts-based, and formed with parent voice around really how much they enjoy sharing their own experiences, their own questions, their own ideas, and their own talents with other parent peers, and having their own opportunities for creative expression. They've described them as almost therapeutic, and those arts-based sessions kind of complement our Reggio-inspired approach for children. So I'll briefly go into family time that brings together parents, early childhood educators, and parents, children, and educators together for playful learning. And in those sessions, there's explicit messaging around the inherent value and educational value too of parents interacting in their home languages with their children. Parents wear so many hats, and when they are studying, like parents at BRIA are doing, in addition to working, which many of them work night shifts, and raising young children, it can be challenging to find moments for deep connection with your children. So these times of play-based, language-rich interactions in a supportive multicultural environment tend to be really valued. And the parent leadership component is also really important. So lastly, I will mention, I don't think I'll have time to touch on PD for this question, maybe later, but I want to mention parent leadership. There are specific opportunities for leadership. We have student council, the board of trustees, a group called BRIA Voices for All, and then pathways to employment, either at BRIA or other community organizations. BRIA Voices for All is a parent-led advocacy group for parents in the most advanced English levels. It's facilitated by a BRIA graduate and a current staff member, student services coordinator, Gabi Salado, provides an opportunity for parents to understand policymaking, how decisions are made, conduct research, and organize to enact change. It really enhances the transfer of students' academic abilities to policy when that is embedded in the educational context, and they're increasingly equipped to be change agents and influence the systems that they interact with. And as you can imagine, bilingual education and language justice are two key issues that they tend to engage with and organize around. So maybe I can talk about PD later. I think I've spoken too much.
No. That's great. So much valuable information. And we have a whole session dedicated to PD, so we'll certainly go deep in that piece, but it is an integral part of each of these conversations, right? I'm going to turn to Dr. Robert next. Let's talk about the older kids. Before becoming superintendent at Osborne, you were a principal at a dual language school and a dual language educator. Tell us about the nuts and bolts building blocks to establish a dual language program at the elementary school level.
Yes. So one thing to keep in mind for me is the context of being a public school district. Our dual language programs are held on campuses that are neighborhood public schools. So not everyone is going to necessarily want dual language, although we want them to. But there are tracks within our school. So there's a dual language track, and then there are those that don't choose the dual language track where all instruction's in English. You know, I've spent 18 years here within the Osborne School District, 10 as a principal at Encanto Elementary School, and then I'm beginning year 8 as superintendent, and we've expanded our dual language programs across our district as well. So that's exciting. But, you know, like I mentioned, well, like I'm going to mention now, we've been doing this for 25 years here within the Osborne School District. So the program was established before I came in. But in order to continue or establish new programs, you've got to be very conscious of those programmatic structures. And so I wanted to touch on a couple aspects of what you mentioned earlier. One is that leadership team, and not just the leadership team, but, you know, our teachers, our classroom teachers are those leaders, and play significant roles on the leadership teams of our campus, you know, as a smaller body that comes together thinking about professional learning and support for teachers in their classrooms. We have lots of, you know, each of the leadership teams, you know, could consist of up to 10 individuals from the campus. So it's really a personnel question, really thinking about the workforce. We're facing a huge teacher shortage nationwide, but the more specialized and technical the position becomes, the harder it is to recruit and the more important it is to retain. There are many obstacles other than highly qualified and bilingual. There's also the knowledge base of the theoretical perspectives of bilingual education and new educators. And this is where I feel really blessed in Osborne to have our curriculum specialist now and for the past number of years be former dual language teachers and coaches in working with all emerging bilinguals, you know, within our district. But with the older grades too, when you're thinking about personnel, you're getting into the older grades of an elementary district, you're reaching into the complex academic standards, government and sciences and mathematics, that having individuals with the academic language to teach that content in 2 languages is intensified beyond the early years setting. So now, after all this investment in the professional learning of our educators, you can see how critical the retention piece is. But curriculum also plays a really big role in the retention of educators, because if you are not able to go out and get a rich bilingual curriculum that's not just a direct translation from English, but rather written in the, you know, in the primary language or that target language that you're building upon, as well as having cultural sensitivity, not only to that target language, but also the cultures represented in your school, you're going to have your teachers creating and using their own resources to create a lot of materials. Those resources are time and money. And without a robust curriculum, bilingual curriculum, that's going to impact, these aren't silos, all of those areas within the framework. Poor curriculum choices impacts your workforce, because your workforce is now dedicating their resources towards creating what the district should have provided for them. And you're going to burn your staff out, and then you're starting all over. I think one of those big professional development pieces too is thinking about what that professional learning is going to be for your teachers, and being conscious not only of the using of the materials, but making sure that the materials being used to make cross-linguistic references, so children aren't just learning academic concepts, but building a bilingual identity through their learning. So we have to be super, super conscious of that professional learning and that leadership team in creating for your school. One other aspect I want to touch on is that access point to school. The CEP and the Century Foundation have established that AEO framework, that access, the experiences and the outcomes. I think our experiences are fantastic here within Osborne, but it's the access and the outcomes that we wind up spending a lot of time on. Access, because here in Arizona, we're the only state in the union that still has those restrictive laws in place that don't allow for multilingual learners, language learners to be in our dual language programs. However, our state board of education has allowed for a 50-50 dual language model to be used as an English learner model, which I'm grateful for, but we still have these archaic and language restrictive policies in the books on the law. And that does a lot of, we wind up spending work fighting against lawsuits like we did this past year that are looking to restrict access for all students to being able to have a dual language education. And on the outcome side, when you've got lawmakers that are fighting against access for all, we have to make sure that our outcomes are at the highest level. Now, for 25 years now, we have not had that problem where we see both academic and linguistic outcomes for our students exceeding those of English-only environments. But it's really important. We have to keep those outcomes at the top of our mind, not only because it's important for students, but it's important for them to be able to even have access. If the outcomes start to slip, then people are going to look to limit that access and say this isn't good for students. And therefore, we need to expand these English-only types of models. We're super proud not only of the academic outcomes, but also the language outcomes. Our students at the end of 6th grade, we start our dual language from 3-year-old preschool all the way up through 6th grade, and then have language taught at 7th and 8th grade. So our kids come from ages 3 through 14, and our 6th graders test on just the Spanish language itself, and are many times able to pass the majority of our students pass our partner high school districts Spanish 1 freshman Spanish 1 curriculum. So we are promoting students not only to enter high school possibly in year 2 or year 3 of Spanish, but that also pushes them in a great opportunity to earn a seal of biliteracy. So when we start thinking about the objectives that our Secretary of Education has, envisioning raising the bar through the superpower of bilingualism, I think we're doing a fantastic job, but it really comes down to how we're setting up the program right from the onset.
Brought up so many important points, and I want to follow up on all of them. I just think what you mentioned at the end on the high stakes of outcomes with dual language education in particular is something that is always on our minds, particularly in a place like Arizona, but across the country where the language wars are still slippery slope, I think, everywhere, and those ideologies are still there. When if you don't have the outcomes, it gets blamed on the fact that it's dual language, not on the fact that something else might be off, right? And then there's a target on dual language as a whole and as a model, and we've seen that playbook play out over the course of history. So thank you for bringing that up. And underlying the importance of quality as we begin to expand and hopefully scale models like this. Dr. Rodriguez, I'm going to go to you next. I want to talk about English learners specifically now. Talk to us about the kids you serve and how you've built a dual language model specifically to serve these students and what impacts you've seen.
Thank you. Of course. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Children's Equity Project for this invitation. This is really a great panel. So let's start. Dreamers Academy is a dual language kindergarten to 5th grade public charter school committed to ensuring that all of our students become bilingual and biliterate in both English and Spanish by the end of 5th grade. And we serve Sarasota and Manatee counties in the state of Florida. We know that research has shown that dual language education is the most effective way to close the achievement gap for English language learners. And our school was established not only to promote academic excellence, but also to serve as an intervention that helps students maintain their native language while learning that second one. In fact, we currently have one of the largest populations of English language learners in the district, which speaks to the program's impact. In just 3 years of operations, we've already seen significant outcomes. But we have been very fortunate. I would like to acknowledge that we have a strong support from our founder, Jerry Chaffee, and our Dreamers Academy Board of Directors. And let me start with some of these impactful points. We have an amazing family engagement. In fact, it's exceptional. It is imperative for every dual language to have a high family engagement because we want to make sure that our families understand that there is an expectation for them to be involved. And that means that they understand the requirements of the charter school and what their children are learning. We in Dreamers Academy, our families are amazing. They have demonstrated high attendance and participation in events, and even their mandatory conferences, which we do in the first quarter. We ask all of our families to come in and speak with their teachers and bring their children to the conferences because this is all about them. So that brings, from the beginning, it cultivates that positive, caring culture that prioritizes both academic achievement and character development. And also, it helps to bring the students to, hey, this education is about me as well. So talking about our students, we believe that a happy child is a child that learns. Our students at Dreamers Academy are thriving because they feel safe, they feel connected, they enjoy the learning process. They can speak Spanish and English in every class. And with their teachers. In fact, talking about teachers, when I want to build on that, we are so proud to maintain 100% retention of our highly effective teachers and staff as we strive to create that excellent working environment. In fact, most of our dream team are bilingual. So they exhibit a strong work ethic and professionalism, and I'm always bragging about them because they're fantastic. They just bring this positive energy, impact, knowledge to our students. And I just say our staff is just super talented. They are just pros at skill problem solving, which were qualities that I prioritized when I was interviewing and assembling the dream team for Dreamers Academy. And we continue to innovate to address the challenges and strategically improve on the process to support our students, our families, and our staff. But perhaps the most impact, the greatest impact that I believe is that we have built trust. And I know some of the panel were talking about building that trust and building those relationships with our school community. We believe that relationships are crucial for Dreamers Academy's success. And as we continue to grow, we are excited that next year we're adding our 5th grade class. As we grow, each year we grew a grade level. And we are confident that it will be an amazing year. And we are more prepared than ever as we enter our 4th year operation, serving 560 students next year and then 650 students the following. So really happy about that.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. Dr. Williams, let's go to you. You've run across the country and visited a bunch of dual language programs across the age spectrum. We shared a link in the chat of a New York Times opinion piece that you wrote about Bria, in fact. And you've written lots of such pieces about different programs. Talk to us about the themes that you've seen across the most impressive schools, the most successful schools and programs. What were those common ingredients at the structural and programmatic levels?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And second of all, as I was getting ready for the webinar, I thought, I hadn't done this in a while. I sat down and I wrote it out and I realized, I've been to a dozen states, dual language programs in a dozen states and DC. I don't know the exact number of schools, but it's well into the 50s or 60s at this point. And I want to start and kind of scale up, like start with some of the hurdles that you just have to clear, I think, for a dual language program to work, and then get more refined to some of the really like the smaller stuff. One thing, it's going to sound dumb, but I don't know, I'm a parent of 3 kids. And this is one of the things I always think of when I walk onto a dual language campus is it's got to be loud. It has to be noisy. It has to be effervescent with language. It's got to be kind of bursting. A good dual language school, almost always the sum of the 2 languages adds up to more than the parts, right? That it just has more language going on almost inevitably. And so that's sort of number one. The best dual language schools I've gone to, that's palpable, both in class during instruction, but also in social time. This is not a quieter environment. It's not a, a staid environment. This is a place where there's just language happening. 2, so 1 level up. I don't think it's possible to run a very high quality dual language program without a palpable commitment to the non-English language and associated cultures. Right. Usually we're talking about Spanish in the United States. That's the largest number of these programs. There is Spanish English programs, but that's not only. I mean, there are Mandarin programs, there are Hmong programs, Vietnamese programs, Russian programs, French programs. It's important on these campuses that because of the structure of how American society works, because of the structure of how American languages hierarchies are set up, that whatever the other language in the program is other than English has pride of place and is visible and can be felt on the campus too. So it's not just that it's loud, it's that you're hearing Spanish, you're hearing Mandarin, you're hearing that like Japanese, you're hearing the language bursting out everywhere. It's visible on the walls. It's something you hear when you walk in the front office. It's not a campus where these two languages are sort of treated exactly the same, because English is everywhere outside of that school, right? Pressuring on the students and families. And so in the school, a really great dual language program is trying to at least counterbalance that somewhat. One of the easiest ways, and sort of another tier up, is back to enrollment policy. We've heard a little bit about that already, is making sure that we commit when we open these programs to enrolling native speakers of the non-English language whenever possible, so that it's just easier to have a stronger presence of the non-English language when you have native speaking students and native speaking families there. Of course, it's the same when you have also native speaker staff, when you have staff who are genuinely in more than just language, representational of the identities of their students and of the languages that are being spoken. Beyond that, there's lots more technical stuff. There's stuff like ensuring that your classroom libraries, and actually this is why I have to give Bria a unique shout out on this, that if you ever do happen to visit, you should see some of their libraries. They're stunning. Your libraries can't just be translated versions of Hop on Pop. They can't just be translated versions of English language texts. The more authentic texts you have that were written in the language of instruction, the other language, the non-English language, that are authentic to the culture of these students that you're serving, the better. There's lots of other things I could gesture to, right? Effective diagnostic protocols for tracking language acquisition. Fair and effective use of assessments to make sure that you're tailoring assessment or tailoring instruction to meet the needs of students in both languages. But if you take one thing away from what I'm saying, I would start with the noise, and I would start with the presence of the non-English language and the attendant culture.
You're a writer at heart that like brings it to light in a visual format for folks. So I think we could all see what that would look like. Gladys and Lisa, I'm gonna go to you all to the next one, and feel free to jump in. You both lead or have led programs with infants and toddlers, right? A lot of this work and a lot of the research is focused on the older kids, right? Preschool, elementary. But there's less research and attention on the baby years. However, we have a whole bunch of research on brain development, right? And the early childhood development that happens during those critical years, and the language explosion. If anybody's a parent or has worked with a kid or has known a kid, right, during those years, there are these charts that like show such a steep slope, and such an important of that piece. Talk to us about why dual language education and dual language immersion is so critical to push into baby systems, and what unique considerations we need to be thinking about in establishing infant toddler programs with this dual language lens. And Gladys, you want to, oh, Lisa, jump in first.
Sure. Yeah, I'm really glad we're honing in on babies and what we can all do in our organizations and in our spheres of influence to promote this transfer, this tremendous transfer of cognitive, social, emotional, and language benefits for infants through multicultural education, multilingual education and multilingual parenting. This leverages one of families' most important assets, their language, their culture. So during such a critical period, which we all know is characterized by all this neuroplasticity. So if teachers and families can really attend to this and are supported to attend to this during infancy, then bilingualism, multilingualism it's just natural. Like they become crawlers, they become walkers, they become bilingual people. And so slowing down to share this gift of language in an infant-centric way just feels also to me like even more of a treasure these days in an attention economy with frenetic stimuli coming at adults and children at all times. So I think thinking about the how, the best practices for building young children's language and vocabularies, and these important qualities of presence, attention, co-regulation, and language in context. Speaking of context, I know that a few weeks ago, New America Foundation put on a great webinar about how to better support DLLs with disabilities, and Lillian Duran pointed out that language is not just an isolated skill, and encourage the audience to look beyond. So I think also perhaps that's even more, that advice might even be more accepted now with the discourse around science of reading and the importance of knowledge building. And so we can think about knowledge building for babies. And in order to provide a high quality language immersion program, we have to look beyond just the instructional delivery and skill development. Look at the whole ecosystem, the whole child, the whole family. As much as possible, we try to match educators and support staff who are linguistic culture matches. But when that's not possible, we do rely on some technology solutions for adults to provide language access. And we have a digital literacy staff who guides us in that. It's in all of our best interest to create the ideal conditions for building an expansive linguistic repertoire for children from the time of infancy. And to do so in a joyful and a research-informed way. So we try to partner with parents to apply research and dispel myths about bilingualism. I heard about a small study at University of Chicago that looked at toddlers and the difference between overheard speech and directed speech. And they found that direct speech was more predictive of later vocabulary size. And I think together with families, educators, we try to build babies' vocabulary in this context that I talked about of presence. It all comes down to those human connections. And we focus a lot on the benefits of bilingualism, creativity, concentration, language, vocabulary, social connections, family connections, open-mindedness, positive identity, sense of belonging, and how very important it is for babies to hear as much of that language as possible in their first year of life. We know and celebrate that bilingual children have higher activity in their prefrontal cortex, and that controls key cognitive skills that are going to impact not only their later academic outcomes, but even mental health. So I think infants are just such an important part of our 2-gen model. They're the very, very beginning. And rich language environments and learning more than one language is going to help them become creative, competent, connected, communicative problem solvers, which I think is exactly what our country needs more of right now. So
I think we could all agree with that. Gladys?
So, much has been said, so I am just going to go over a couple of things. We talked about our programs being relationship-based and how much this connection that we have with families is going to be so important to the development of successful programs. So I think that understanding families' language goals from the very beginning is very important, so we can support each other and we can understand. In the center at United Way, we have children whose first language is English and children whose first language is Spanish. And what we are aiming to is building that bilingual community. So there's going to be a lot of exchanges in between the different families, and having this cohesive kind of understanding of what is happening in the classrooms is going to be better than anything. I think that we talked a lot about bathing children in language, bathing babies and toddlers with language. Our teachers who are constantly talking and bringing concepts that are being shown and are part of the classrooms that they have. Modeling the staff with the kind of attitudes and kind of behaviors that they need to have in the classrooms, making sure that staff understands thoroughly what is it that you're in, what is happening to this child, and how much your role is going to impact where children are going to be going. I think that was said before, these libraries of books, they cannot be translations. They need to be this books that are going to be showing the things that they are going to be, that represent who we are and the cultures that we're bringing together. Understanding the time where parents and teachers come together to learn. So both of us know what we're doing. Not only that, but making sure that the routines that we have in the classroom are routines where both language are being used, and that we are sure that the correct words are being used. One of the things that we have in the Hispanic communities, that we have many words for many different things. So we need to make sure that we're bringing the right language to it. Understanding that our teachers need to be taken care of, meaning that not only do they need education, not only that we need to work so much in the retention of the staff that is going to be in the classroom so we can ensure that continuity in what we are doing. So it forms part of the work. I want to talk a lot about continuity of care, how important it is that this child is with the same team of teachers throughout the first 3 years, because again, it brings this connection in between the family, the staff, and the child that is going to be so important when we're talking about communication, when we're talking about language. I think all of the other things have been talked about, so moving in that direction.
Thank you so much, Gladys and Lisa. I think you made some really important points, and my kids aren't babies anymore, but just the thought, they're still young, and just the thought of taking your baby to a place and leaving them while you go work in a childcare setting where it's unfamiliar, it's new adults, it's a new setting, and there's no language there. Thinking about a toddler, right, and that language explosion happening. And so much of it is on serve and return, right? Like the toddler says something and the adult comes in. So much of that, that's so critical for brain development. But when there is not that shared language, right, that becomes so much harder to optimize and really make use of all of those thousands of learning opportunities and interaction attempts that happen on a daily basis. Dr. Rodriguez, we're running short on time, so I'm gonna ask folks to share their thoughts in a little bit brief, but we have a few more questions to get to. If we turn to kindergarten early grades, we know early literacy is a hot topic for policymakers, for educators, kind of all over the map in this country. Talk to us about the programmatic structures in place to really nurture early biliteracy and about some of the outcomes that you've seen in that space in your school.
Absolutely. So the kindergarten team has to be strong. We're going to start there. With the structure of our kindergarten program, we have 6 dedicated teachers, 3 who teach in English and 3 who teach in Spanish, forming what we call cohorts, 3 cohorts that share 2 homerooms, each homeroom of 18 students. Each cohort is also supported by 1 bilingual paraprofessional who focuses on early literacy in both languages. So there is a total of 9 teaching staff for 6 classrooms of 18 students, which kind of compares to what we use in the early years, which is ratio 12:1. Our paraprofessionals or teacher assistants, however you want to call, they are just pillars of our program in kindergarten. Most of these paraprofessionals are going to be classroom teachers, so they are learning classroom management, they're learning our instructional model and pedagogy, they're mentored by the certified teachers. And because of that, we have also partnered with several teaching colleges to create our own teacher pipeline, and we are sending them to finish their bachelor's degree, which is great. So one of the key features of our kindergarten program, I mean, this is all about the kindergarten team as well. We start with our kindergarten early screening process. Sometimes I think we started doing it the last week of May, actually the first week of August, I'm sorry. And then we said, why not, let's start the last week of May or the first week of June so that we can get a head start and help our kindergarten incoming students, kind of like give them some recommendations. So that's what we did. So in the first week of June, our kindergarten team meets to assess incoming students, and which allows them to build our rosters with intention. We talk about intention, doing things strategically. We balance the language abilities of the students in both languages, literacy skills, and personality types. We know that our children learn as much from each other as from their teachers. So our kindergarten screening is a really great opportunity to connect with the parents, offering those recommendations for the little ones. A second feature is our kindergarten kickoff day, which is something I can't get credit for. Again, it's the kindergarten team who came with this fantastic thing, which kindergarten kickoff day takes place a day before the start of the school year. On this day, students get to know their peers, their teachers, classroom routines in a more relaxed environment. They take the students to tours, the entire building, the playground areas, which they love. And they take them to explore specials like art room, music, also our biblioteca, tech center, which again, I add to that. All of our books are in both English and Spanish. And they come to my office to ask questions. And also I tell them, you come to the principal office is to read me a book and show me your accomplishments. So it's really cool. And we have made this a tradition so that our kids can take ownership and pride in our school. And we believe in parental engagement from day one. So after the parents take their kids to the classroom and walk them, then they meet with leadership and the admin support for cafecito, a session afterwards. And this helps establish a positive tone for the rest of the year because it fosters that strong relationship with families without the pressure of the full school day, like that first school day that could be very stressful for some of them. So essentially what we want is for our families to have an amazing experience as they send their children to school for the first time, at least for most of them. The last feature I wanted to mention is that our kindergarten team works in synergy. They are planning together daily to create interactive hands-on lessons aligned to standards, tailored to the skill levels of each student, which is important to build both confidence and language skills. Our collaborative planning process enhances our program's effectiveness, and this theme, our theme for the year will be cohesive collaboration, where we will continue to improve the structure to constantly innovate, share pedagogy, best practices, unique lessons implementation, and it has worked really well for us, especially for our younger teachers that receive coaching and mentoring. So we want to continue to have them in our school be successful, happy, and obviously to stay with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Robert, one of the things we learned in our research is that the dual language part needs to be layered on top of high quality instruction and learning in order to have the impacts we seek, right? You are in the middle of establishing a new public district dual language Montessori program, something that's very rare. It's a unicorn. It's also very exciting. Talk to us about Montecito Community School and what those core programmatic structures are up and running.
Yeah, that's a mouthful to say that all. Dual language, public, Montessori. It's a lot. Montecito is an amazing development here in Osborne. The desire to build a Montessori school grew the year we returned from COVID with just one primary classroom. In Montessori, we have 3-year age span. So when I say primary, that's your 3-year-old preschool, 4-year-old preschool, 5-year-old kindergarten. Lower elementary is 1st through 3rd, upper elementary 4th through 6th. So we started with just one primary classroom. Then we also paid for 2 teachers to go through the elementary training, and we're able to open up an elementary classroom in year 2. And as we contemplated moving toward a dual language Montessori program, we opened the opportunity to our bilingual teachers here in Osborne if they'd be willing to commit to the district for a number of years if we paid for their Montessori certification. From there, we had 2 bilingual preschool teachers take the challenge, with us being able to open our first dual language primary classroom last year. This coming year, we're going to be opening classrooms 4, 5, 6, and 7 with 2 more dual language primaries, 1 dual language lower elementary, and an English upper elementary. But that individual is bilingual and could also transition to another dual language elementary in the future. So we have a full track of English Montessori from ages 3 through 12, primary, lower elementary, upper elementary, and a robust future in the dual language side with 3 primaries and 1 lower elementary. You remember, like I said earlier about staffing, shortages exist, and the more technical or specialized you make it, the more difficult. So we took that challenge head on and are in need in the future for bilingual, public education certified, Montessori certified preschool and elementary teachers. We saw 3 years of adding 1 classroom each year, and now we're adding 4 in 1 year. So keeping up with the public demand and desire for this convergence of amazing pedagogy is our latest charge. We've been super successful with both training our own and recruiting, but there are challenges ahead. Now we're truly going into uncharted territory, forming the first public dual language Montessori school in Arizona. And we're working with educators, experimenting, learning from other rare partners, other unicorns, like our friends at the Academia Ana Maria Sandoval in Denver Public Schools, who hosted us this spring on how to divvy up the curriculum within the 50-50 model. Best place to build your program is, of course, from the ground up, from the youngest years. So we looked within the 4 areas of the Montessori program: language, sensorial, mathematics, practical life, which is that care for the self and environment, and of course, language, that practical life as they're building their sense of self and others, and that sensorial as they're taking in these taste, touch, feel experiences that give them order, with their natural world around them and the language that they use to express that self. We started there with Spanish, as well as those community times of coming together, sharing of literature. That's where there's lots of instruction in that target language of Spanish. As we're building this out to the elementary years, where we're dealing with some pretty complex areas of the curriculum, and we need to be, we're looking at the histories and sciences, and the Spanish part got to remember, we just had our first primary. So only that first year of, that kindergarten year of Spanish, those are the kids in that lower elementary. The other second and third graders in that lower elementary don't have any dual language experience. So we need to be conscious that they have the academic language to be able to handle the linguistic experiences that we're giving them. So it's going to be a real, not only trial right now with that lower elementary, but it really gives us time for planning for when those kids come up from the primary into that lower elementary, in building up, what that's going to look like in the future. So with there being such experimentation around it, we want to take the time to, number one, document what we're doing and study this process carefully. And hopefully there may be other, we could be hopefully a roadmap for other experimental programs within the state or around the country that are looking to mesh all of these amazing ideas, Montessori, dual language, really a dream come true type of scenario for many of our families.
Thank you. All right, the last question. I'm gonna pitch this one to Dr. Robert again, and also Dr. Williams to chime in. The discussion so far has been at the ground level, right? Like, what are the nuts and bolts of how you build these things, and what do we need to consider? To wrap up, let's talk about the policy structures that need to be in place at the state and federal level to really expand access to DLI in a high quality way. With the caveat that we're gonna have a whole webinar focused on policy, but we can't end this one without talking about that, particularly Michael, or Dr. Robert, your location and the current policy context there. So either one of you jump in.
I'll start, and I have 2 quick points. The first, of course, is going to be on that access. As a person coming from Arizona, we need the removal of Prop 203. We need our lawmakers. We've got elections coming up, so we need to elect lawmakers that have the bravery to move forward through legislation to put an initiative before the voters to repeal Prop 203 here within the state of Arizona. But as a policy piece, that access has to be something that's guaranteed through policy. Possibly through the Office of Civil Rights. So, the civil, this opportunity for learning to be open to everyone. Second thing, I've mentioned workforce a lot, and I really think we need to start thinking on the dual language side, and the fact that we're going to be getting educators, not only here from colleges and universities within the United States, but if you look at our bilingual ed programs at universities, there's not, there aren't many people going into education, as many as before, and even fewer into dual language or bilingual ed. So we need to start looking elsewhere. So we need to think about that from a policy perspective, and state boards of education, departments of education, that review of transcripts from others coming from other languages and respecting the work that they've done in their home countries in education, and in terms of moves towards certification.
I'd just be very quick. One, we need significant investment, state and federal, to grow both design and implementation grants to help get more dual language programs launched around the country. Something akin to the old Bilingual Education Act. We need something like that again, a competitive grants program that helps to seed these in more places. Because as you've heard from Dr. Robert and others, demand is no longer an issue. Families want these programs, so we should have more of them. 2, there should be significant investment in the teacher pathways, as you also just heard. we have a lot of evidence that our teacher quality training, licensure, credentialing programs are pretty effective at keeping out linguistically diverse candidates, but not super effective at guaranteeing high quality. So we should be looking at, one, how to invest in pathways that actually do produce a lot of bilingual teachers, and two, trying to prune away any credential requirements and licensure requirements that simply don't appear to correlate to better outcomes or better instruction for kids. And the last thing I'd say is just to reiterate something we've heard a lot. We need to have policies in place to reserve some seats and or weight enrollment lotteries to make sure that native speakers of the non-English language in these programs get equitable access to them.
Thank you both. Thank you to the whole panel for all of your work for children and families over all of these years and your continued work and impressive outcomes that we've seen. Thank you for spending time with us today. Thank you to all the participants for joining. Our next webinar is next month, and we will have one every month for the next several months, diving deep on these pieces. As I mentioned, we have a PD one coming up and workforce. We have a policy one coming up. Curriculum, language allocation. We saw questions in the chat getting specifically at some of these areas. So please check out our website and register for those webinars. Check out the resources we've shared. And thanks again for joining. Have a great weekend, everyone.